Very good. Okay, so today's talk is the Odyssey of the Argonauts and beyond. And my call is Kilo 8 Zulu Tango. And as I mentioned earlier, all my slideshows tend to have a lot of links in them. So the link to today's slideshow is tiny.cc/OOA, Oscar Alpha, Odyssey of the Argonauts. And I also put that in the chat. If you need a PDF copy, once you get in there, you can click on the PDF. You'll find links throughout the presentation that have this little link symbol. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the Argonaut Odyssey. It's a saga of my first HF rig, a story filled with teenage lust, a revolution in ham radio, including the movement to fully solid state equipment, one of the best ever gifts from a spouse, no, not that ironic hair comb and watch combo, how not all boat anchors are heavy or contain tubes, ancient Greece's role in amateur radio, a legendary college football coach, and that existential question, is life too short for QRP? So hopefully we'll cover all those today. And this is a Odyssey broken up into multiple acts, including the prequel, the first act, the third act, intermission, detours, etc., etc. So the prequel, Alcon K8ZT, now a silent key, saw that Newt Rockne, the legendary coach of Notre Dame football and professor of chemistry, needed a device that he could use during practice so that the team members could clearly hear him. Alcon's company built him a PA system that Newt referred to as his electric voice. So it became a company called Electro Voice, and after selling Electro Voice in 1968, Mr. Khan bought a 15-acre piece of land and had a 2-story building built right across the street from the Electro Voice plant in Sevierville, Tennessee, eastern Tennessee. In 68, Al Khan, along with Jack Birchfield, K4JU, founded Ten-Tech. In 1969, the company produced a series of modules that hams could use as building blocks in assembling a solid-state, low-power, i.e. QRP CW radio. They also even made a very rare tube transistor, so there was one Ten-Tech tube radio, and that was the early tube transmitter. For more information on the Ten-Tech history, there's a book called the Ten-Tech, The First 40 Years, 1968 to 2008 by N.L. Williams, that's available. It's a hardback. So this is the prequel, continued, the MR1 package. It was basic circuit modules, the MX1, the AA1, the VO1X, and by the way, whenever you see this blueprint, that means that's a link that you can click on for more information. A tuning dial and full instructions were included in the box. And it was designed for breadboard mounting. You supplied your own breadboard, and complete circuit boards only needed to be interconnected, and you'd have yourself the MR1 radio. But our story begins with the next product from Ten-Tech, and that was the Ten-Tech PowerMite series. The PowerMite series basically took all those modules and pre-assembled them for you in a nice metal case, and that was the PM or PowerMite series. There were a number of different PowerMites produced, the PM1, PM2, PM2A, PM1A, and a whole variety. And the funny thing is, even if you open up two of the same exact model, you'll find that sometimes the modules are different inside. As module technology improved, they would substitute new modules. So there really is probably very few PM series that have exactly the same set of modules in them. And the same color, because the colors also varied a little bit on the front panels of these these radios. And the PM series came out in the late 60s, and they were moderately priced radio for the time. So the variants included additional bands and features and had the B in the name. And there's a link here for identifying PowerMite transceivers that tells you about picking out which ones are which based on colors, modules, etc. The PowerMite one was a quirky little 1-watt QRP rig that was the first assembled commercial radio from our friends in Sevierville. It featured a DC receiver, a direct receiver that picked up every shortwave broadcast station in the hemisphere after sundown on 40 meters, but it was still a fun little radio. What can you say about a company that is so humble that they actually ask you to throw 3 different switches to change bands? So when you look at the front of the PM series, you have to throw 3 switches whenever you change bands. You had a choice of 80 meters or 40 meters, with 15 meters available with the AC3 option. This is a instruction sheet. This is the manual for the PM series, PM1, PM2, talking about different parts of the radio. Here's the manual continued with some pictures both inside. You can see the discrete modules are all sitting in here and interconnected. Here's a front view of a PM1. Here's a PM2. Notice on the front there was a crystal holder so that novices could use this radio and operate it crystal controlled, because at the time, even though there's a VFO built into this radio, novices were not allowed to use a VFO to operate. So a novice could put a crystal in the front of this radio and operate it with a crystal. The Power Mite 2 was an improved Power Mite, now with the more popular 20 meter band in place of the 15 meter option. This one was painted all white. Ten-Tec also made a beige version. Some PM2 series used a single large PCB, while most of them used the modules found in the other radios. The audio was only available through a 600 hertz pin type headphones. So if you look on the front of this radio, you'll see the 2 pin connections down here. It did not have a 1/4 inch mic jack on it, phone jack on it. They expected you to use the more high impedance 600 ohm headsets that were available. And you'll find a lot of these radios, people just basically cut that out and put a jack in there to use a 1/4 inch headphone, but they don't work as well with that. Again, you can see the 2 pins out at the bottom here. There was no speaker in this radio, so you had to use headphones. This is the antenna tuner, and we have a frequency, this is the SWR meter and the antenna meter there. Power supply. And that particular power supply provided 1 amp of power. The bridge. As a teenager, I lusted after a Power Mite, but in the 1970s, even at $59.95 was a fortune on a paper boy's wages. I really wanted to have one of these because I thought it would fit great in my Boy Scout backpack, and I could take it camping with me. That's approximately $389 in 2021 dollars. So the first act continued with my high school graduation, college, and no novice license. I went and became a medical technologist. I married a wonderful young lady at the time, Linda Carlson, now K8ODP, but no radio or ham radio license was ever seen. So I did not get this novice license because I didn't know another ham to figure out how to get my license. Fast forward to the winter of 1980, my wife was reading the newspaper and saw an announcement for a novice class and said, "Is that what you wanted to do years ago?" And I said, "Yes." And I asked her, "Would you like to go with me?" So we started taking a class with Roger Milford, W8SXL, now silent key, but Roger gave classes, and I took my novice exam. After endless waiting and hoping that I would not get a license that had B's, F's, or J's in it because they were my Morse code nemesis, in July it finally arrived. I was Kilo Alpha 8 November Radio Charlie, and later that summer my wife received K8ODP. I was ready to buy a radio in the fall of 1981, but of course one of those I was thinking maybe one of those Power Mites, or maybe even the fancier new Argonaut 509 with single sideband capability. Oops, they are no longer available. But at the Cleveland Ham Fest, in 1981, I buy my brand new baby, a Ten-Tec 515. So let's talk a little bit about the name Argonauts. According to Bullfinch's mythology, in ancient Greece, it was suggested to Jason that he undertake the glorious adventure of going in the quest of the Golden Fleece. Jason was pleased with the thought and forthwith made preparations for the expedition. At that time, the only species of navigation known to the Greeks consisted of small boats or canoes. When Jason employed Argus to build him a vessel capable of containing 55 men, it was considered a gigantic undertaking. It was accomplished, however, and the vessel was named Argo for the name of the builder. Jason sent his invitation to all the adventurous young men of Greece, and soon found himself at the head of a band of bold youth, many of whom afterward were renowned among the heroes and demigods of Greece. They were called the Argonauts from the name of their vessel. And this is a map of the Argonauts' vessel travels according to Greek mythology. The second coming of the Argonaut was an article in the November 1971 issue of CQ magazine. And to quote a couple lines from it, longtime readers of CQ will recall the original single sideband Argonaut built by W6AVA for W6UOU in 1957 and sent around the world in an effort to give many DX stations an opportunity to put their country on the air with the then new mode of single sideband. Now, this is not the Tentec Argonaut. This is a homebrew Argonaut by W6AVA. It is fitting, therefore, that a new low-power portable single sideband rig under development at Tentec should also be dubbed the Argonaut. And this is the article, and this is the cover of the magazine. You'll notice there's a little picture of the Argonaut on the front of the cover here, along with this other breadband kit here. And it's called The Second Coming of the Argonaut, written by Jack and Albert. And it's very interesting. They talk about what they're going to build before it even came out. They give some block diagrams and some pictures of early prototypes of the radio. And they also say during the article here, if you're interested in building one, here's some ideas on building your own. So it was rather interesting for a commercial radio. In today's highly mobile society, the need for a small, light, portable rig is rapidly increasing. Reciprocal license, low-cost travel trailers, popularity of camping, proliferation of summer and winter homes all call for a personal ham gear that is easily set up and takes up little space, was part of the article. Also from the article, for emergency service, standby equipment that can be operated independently of commercial power is often a lifesaver. And the big difference was with their all solid state radio, this radio was very easy on power consumption, so it was very easy to use batteries or a simple generator. Low power operation QRP is a growing facet of amateur radio. Thousands of hams are finding an exciting challenge in conquering distance with a few potent watts. With this applications in mind, we started working several years ago to create an entirely new miniaturized transceiver that would be ultra compact, easy to service, operates on both single sideband and CW, usable at maximum power that can be reasonably supplied with a 12-volt lantern battery. To operate on the ham bands 80 meters through 60 meters, to include features that make operating easy and convenient, the Argonaut fills all the objectives. So instead of having to throw 3 switches on the front of it to operate like the power might, simply pushing the microphone or the key gave you immediate transmit. The first Tentec Argonaut was a QRP milestone that combined a receiver and transmitter into a solid-state CW and single sideband multi-band transceiver package. The travel of Jason's Argonauts were an Odyssey, a long wandering voyage usually marked by many changes of fortune. The Tentec Argonaut series has also been an Odyssey with 6 generations and a few tangential relatives. So here's a little timeline of the Argonaut series, starting with the Argonaut 5, starting with the PowerMite predecessor actually. The Argonaut 505, which by the way does not have the word number 505 on the front of it. So if you ever find an Argonaut 505 with a 505 written on the front of it, it's not really right. That's the first version, came out in 71. In 73, they came out with the improved version, the Argonaut 509. And in 1979, they came out with the even more improved and totally black in appearance as opposed to white and eggshell, the Argonaut 515. That's what I bought in the fall of 1981. In 1992, they came out with the first VFO, PLL as opposed to PTO Argonaut, and that is the Argonaut 2, also known as the 535. And it was a rather interesting radio. I have one sitting right off to the right here that you can't see, but it's on my desk here. And it was a rather amazing radio. It had a feature called Jones filter, which allowed a fully adjustable filtering. And in the wrong hands, it would easily allow you to be able to not receive anything at all. And because of that, a lot of people thought it was a very difficult to use radio, but it's actually a way ahead of its time radio. And it's very interesting. It also had a computer interface. It had an LCD screen with a backlight that tend to burn out. And a lot of people exchanged those over the years. But it was a very, very interesting radio, but very expensive for a low-power radio at the time. They also made a high-powered version of it called the Delta, which was basically the same radio with an amplifier stuck on the back of it. In 2003, they came out with the Argonaut 5, which is also known as the 516, and The final Argonaut that came out was the Argonaut 6 in 2013. It is a another very small solid-state radio with a LCD display on the front of it. It's sitting right here to the right also. But here's an Argonaut 505 with original dowels on it. Many of these dowels get swapped out over the years, so when you find a used version of it, you'll quite often find that they substitute an Argonaut 509 dowel for the main tuning dowel, which was a much nicer dowel, I think, in some ways, and they would change out the other dowels. There was also some controls on the back, which you can't see from here, but of course, that meant you had to reach around the back to do some of the controls. Shown here with the 1 watt power supply. I'm sorry, 1 amp power supply. There was a speaker built in on the top of the case, and the microphone jack and the speaker jack are on the back of this. So came out in 1971. Original price was $288. Covered 80 through 10 meters. No work bands, of course, because they didn't exist at that time. Although you could receive 10 meters to listen to WWV. You would tune it to 15 meters and then detune it using the peaking control, and you could actually receive WWV on it. 5 watts of input. That's back in the days when everything was advertised as input, but basically about 2 watts of output. 12 volts, about 150 milliamps on receive, about 800 milliamps on transmit. So it takes about an amp, but it was very low power for the time. And there was also an available 50 watt amplifier, which I also have. This is the amplifier here. Here's a picture of an Argonaut 509. And notice now it has the 509 written on here. And they've made some changes to the radio, and they've greatly improved the receive on the radio. Here's a close-up of another 509. And they moved a couple of the controls of the front that used to be on the back. Price of the 509 was $329. It had 2 really good features that you could order separately. That was an outboard CW active audio filter that actually inserts into the IF of the radio, and it had big benefits over the filterless 505. So it was very good for CW. The mic gain and power moved to the front, so you didn't have to reach around the back for those. Now, one of the things about the 509, the 505, and most of the Ten-Techs out there in boat anchor land are they had great manuals that included both board and circuit descriptions, schematics, and even voltage readings for testing. And I'm not a technician by any means, but I've actually repaired a 509 that would not receive. It was very interesting. You turned it on, it went into the transmit automatically. But by going by and looking at a couple boards in the manual and taking a couple voltage readings, I realized that one of the transistors was faulty, and I was able to change that. So very easy to service. Nothing really better than the fact that not only they show you the board, show you the circuit diagram, and give you the voltage out pin for both transmit and receive makes troubleshooting much easier. Here's a picture of the top view of the radio. It had what was called a PTO, permeability tuned oscillator, that was inside this case here. And this is the part that quite often gets gunky with the grease in there and causes the thing to freeze up. So this was very common that people would have to rebuild that and change the grease out on the gears in there. Here's a picture of the bottom of the radio. And you'll notice it had true band switching. So when you flip this switch in the front, it was changing a bunch of things in the radio. Here's a picture of the front of my 515. And you notice it's now has a black case. One big change is they split the 10 meter band up. And so you click through these various settings here to have the 10 meter band spread out so it wasn't so tight on the radio. And they changed also a couple of the other features on the front. The RF gain is available on the front of the radio, which makes it much more convenient, and the drive is available on the front. There's a little OT button to show when you have the offset turned on, and it was a switch that popped in and out, so you didn't have to worry about having it set to 0. You could simply pull the switch out to turn off the offset tuning, or what's commonly called the RIT. It was $429 new. I think I paid $399 for mine when I bought it. Greatly improved sensitivity, 10 meter band split into sub bands, black color, and it had a matching audio and notch filter that was really good. And actually, that's one of the best of accessories. If you have one of these, if you can track down one of those filters, they're fabulous. My wife Linda wanted to remind you that $429 in 1981 was $1,294 in 2021. She made sure that I put that in here. She's not here right now, or she'd be chiming in the background. So no power mite, but now I had a shiny new black and Argonaut 515. No one ever told me that a novice should not start with QRP. So my QRP career as a ham began 40 years ago, this last year. And last year I also passed the 100,000 mark for QSOs with 5 watts or less. So my ignorance in 1981 has resulted in a long QRP career. Living in a duplex, my first antenna was actually a dipole in the attic, and I wasn't able to make contacts. I couldn't figure out why. Other than the fact that the dipole was in the attic, that wasn't the biggest problem. It was ignorance on my part. I had a horrible antenna, but I also did not understand propagation, so I was always listening on the wrong bands at the wrong times. I spent a lot of time during the day listening on 80 and a lot of time at night listening on 10. Nervous novice fears of doing something wrong during a contact or not being able to copy the other station's code. Remember, I was a novice at the time, so even though the radio had single sideband, I wasn't allowed to transmit on the single sideband end of things. I needed to use only the CW portion of the radio. Success. I read every book and magazine I could get my hands on. I attended club meetings and asked old timers 1,000 questions. And as my wife says now, I'm the old guy that everyone else asks the questions to. I got a new outside dipole, even if it was only 20 foot high on one side and 15 foot on the other. Basically ran from a 15-foot piece of PVC in the back corner of my property to the corner of the other person's roof in my duplex. So it was a good deal that I was only operating 2 watts. And I built some confidence and I was able to get on and make some contacts. I got my tech license and I sort of got distracted in the UHF and VHF and satellite operation with another Ten-Tech radio, the Ten-Tech Model B transverter, which allowed me to do Oscar 10. And then also children sort of got in the way. But even that, 1983, about 2 years later, I actually started churning out HF contacts on my radio. And that was at the apartment I worked my first States, and I worked many things. Then 1986, I got a new home, got a tower with a small beam at 30 feet up, and I worked all states QRP and DXCC. I won a new radio at the Dayton Hamvention Banquet I forget what year it was, but to give you an idea, the speaker at that was I'm gonna forget his name now. That's horrible. The gentleman that wrote the Christmas Story, and I'll remember it later. The other speaker was the astronaut John Glenn, and we got to meet them. And I won a radio.
Gene Shepard.
Gene Shepard, thank you. He was K2, but I can't remember his call sign off the top of my head either right now. So the Argonaut was moved to the shelf for a while after I got my 757, but I continued to operate at low power because I was worried about interfering with other people. And rigs come and go, but I remain QRP operator. I had a Kenwood TS680, which I bought my wife for a Christmas birthday present because she was a ham also. That's another advantage of having a spouse as a ham. You can buy them radios for presents. And then a radio that I really used a lot on QRP, the Yaesu FT817, which was a very interesting radio, having both HF, VHF, and UHF in a really small, nice little package. But I got back to my CW roots with the Elecraft K2 and started operating a lot of QRP CW with that radio. The FT817 had been used mainly on 10 meters on single sideband. I then got a K3, number 43 in serial number. I had a Flex 1500, which it was okay. It was a really remarkable piece of technology change for the time. And then a KX3 and a KX2 and all sorts of things. So I've had many things. And the Argonaut moved to the shelf, but it still comes out at least once a year to play. I will never get rid of this radio. It is so much fun to listen to. The audio sounds so nice not being processed. But then you turn it on during a contest weekend and you realize what modern rigs can really do as far as filtering and other things like that. You also can't work split with it if the person moves too far away from your RIC because there's no double VFOs in it. But it is still a great radio to play around with. So the Argonaut returns with with the Argonaut 2, the dual VFOs instead of a PTO, a great digital display, which unfortunately had a backlight that burned out quite often. but it was easy to replace. General coverage, the Jones variable filter, which I mentioned earlier. They also added FM and AM, so you could use it if you were an AM fan or if you wanted to use it on 10 meters FM. It had split frequency capabilities, 48 memories, computer controlled output. It was somewhat high priced at $1,300. And when you put that in today's dollars, it was over $2,000 for that radio at the time. The Argonauts series returned with new numbering scheme. Let's see, we had a 505, a 509, and then the 515, and then we went to the 2. Or was that actually a 4 or a Roman numeral 4? So there was some confusion, and here's the radio right here, the 535. Now, it even gets more confusing when people start talking about the Argosies, which are not the Argonauts, but very similar. They were a Ten-Tech radio that had 5 watt and 50 watt switchability on the back panel, which I'll be discussing here in a little while. And the Delta model was the same as the Argonaut 2, but it had a 100 watt amplifier in it. So after the 2, what comes next? Well, it's the 5. So the Argonaut 5 had a price of $895. It was smaller than the Argonaut 2. It was a good performer, but the 900 milliamps on receive made it not the best radio for using portable, and it was very sensitive to low voltage. So if you ever used an Argonaut 5 in the field, you might have realized that you would end up with problems when your battery would drop down in voltage. Here's a picture of the 505. I'm sorry, the Argonaut 5. There was also a companion radio that was a VHF UHF radio that went along with this, the 6.2 that covered 6 meters and 2 meters, and it was very popular. So it had something called speed-sensitive VFO tuning, which is really neat. The faster you move, the faster it moves, so you didn't have to change the rate that you were using. It had a much more forgiving DC power requirements would let you operate all the way down to 9.5, which Anthony, the 5 would never let you do.
Anthony?
Yes.
Just real quick, that speed-sensitive VFO was invented by Drake.
Ah, very good.
They all had to pay Drake. ICOM, everybody had to pay Drake for that adjustable VFO rate.
And that's another whole boat anchor story. When I was in my local radio club, I remember I had a couple really big Drake fans, and they were so excited for the 7 to come out back in the day, and then that was the end of the line.
Yep.
The Argonaut 6 also had a matching 100 watt solid-state amplifier called the 418. It operated digital modes with full rated power, so you could operate it on RTTY or PSK or FT8. They did not include 6 meters, 12 meters, or 60 meters in it to save money or space, as they say, and it had a price of $995. So that's the 6, and that's the last of the Argonauts. And here's a picture of it. Very compact, nice little radio. As I said, I have one. So now that we've completed the Argonaut exploration, let's return back to our story of my ham radio life. 1999, I got my extra class license. The first thing I did when I got home from getting my upgrade is I took out the Argonaut 515 and used every band and mode possible. So it wasn't limited as I was as a technician before that. So I took it out and made sure I used 80 meters through 10 meters single sideband NCW. And it was still a great radio. In 2020, I changed my call sign after upgrading to K8ZT from K8NRC. And in 2021, now over 98,000. Well, as of the end of 2021, over 100,000 QSOs, 105,000 actually to be exact. And I have worked all states, 11 band QRP, and QRP DXCC, 8 bands, both CW and single sideband. So the Argonaut really did start me out on a long and fruitful ham journey. So let's talk a little bit about Ten-Tech in general. Ten-Tech was one of the innovators in solid-state only transceivers. Their quick, silent QSK keying became the standard of the others they're compared to. And I'm sure if you've owned a Ten-Tech radio in the past, when you operate a lot of modern radios, you get disappointed by that clicking sound in the background. Operating an 817 on CW sounds like it's a clattering wreck to me. I'm used to the silent keying of the Ten-Techs. The Ten-Tech QRP radios had a big part in the development of a cult of QRPers and portable operations. Ten-Tech, along with Heathkit, were the major factors in development of many other QRP radios, including both commercial, kit, and homebrew models. So people that grew up on the Argonauts and on the HWs, on the Hot Water series, the Hot Water 8, Hot Water 9, Hot Water 7 from Heathkit, were ready to adopt the 817, the K2, the 4040, and a whole variety of radios. Here's a legacy timeline of the radios. Basically the MR kits, the PM kits, the one and only tube transmitter in 1971. And by the way, there was a matching solid state receiver, which I do have one of, the RX10s, the Argonaut 505, 509, and then their first high-powered radio, the Triton 1, came out in 1974, followed by the Triton 2. The Triton 4 came out in 76. In 71, they brought out a very interesting radio. It was called the Century 21. It was a CW only radio with an analog dial on the front of it. And then they came out with, it was a direct conversion receiver in that radio. It came out with the Triton 4 digital. That was their first digital radio of any type. And then in 1979, they converted the Century 21 into the Century 21 digital with a digital display on the front of it. The Argonaut 515 remained analog. The Omni A and Omni D were digital, and the Delta 580. In 1981, the Omni C came out, and in 1981, the Argosy 525 came out. And I've owned a number of those. It's a great radio. It's 5 watts, 50 watts, selectable with a switch on the back, single sideband CW, great receiver, great QSK keying. They came out with a digital version of it in 1982, the Argosy 2 D, 552D, and the Century 22 was the last of their radios that was a direct conversion CW only radio, and it had a cream colored face on it, and there's one of those sitting over here, and they're pretty hard to come by. The Paragon, the Omni 5, the Argonaut 2 came out in 1991, along with the Delta 2 high power, the Omni 6, the Paragon series, and the Paragon series were handband only radios. They did not have general coverage receivers in them. The Scout with its pluggable modules, and one of those is back behind me in a box back there that I'm selling for someone right now for our local radio club. The Omni 6, the T-Kit single band transceivers that someone talked about a little bit about when we were getting ready earlier. The Pegasus, which was the computer module that you hooked up to your computer and operated, very much a predecessor to the whole Flex series. It was a radio without a dial on the front of it. You had to hook it up to a computer. The Jupiter, and then the Omni 7 was the last of the Omni series. Now there's the Eagle and some other radios beyond that, but I'm not going to go past 2008. The Ten-Tech Triton, here's a picture of it. Here's a picture of the Century 21, the CW only analog radio. This had a built-in power supply so you could plug it into AC. It was the only Ten-Tech transceiver with a built-in power supply. Here's a picture of the digital version with the CW, I'm sorry, that's the crystal monitor, so you could spot the radio, crystal calibrator, I should say. Here's some pictures of the Omni A, B, C, and D. This is a 100-watt radio, digital output. Here's some pictures of a couple of my Argosies, the Argosy 525 and the Argosy, which is an analog radio, and the 525D, which was a digital display radio. And actually, I had this radio in my shack for quite a while, and this was my main RIDI radio that I used. I had it dedicated to using on RIDI. Here's some pictures of the Ten-Tech Century 22 CW direct conversion radio. Looks very much like the Argosy, but it weighs about half as much. This is a 100-watt high-performance digital radio replaced the Omni, and this series used the PTO rather than the PLL. Here's the Paragon. Here's the Delta. I had one of these. Some of you may also had one of these that would jump all around in frequency. They had a lot of trouble with the PLLs being stable in this, and it would jump around in frequency considerably. Here's a picture of the Pegasus, and as I said before, a radio without a dial on the front. You had to connect it to your computer and use software to run it. the Omni 5 and the Omni 6. The Jupiter was interesting. The Jupiter had a built-in CW decoder in the that you could add. It wasn't in the original, but they had their firmware update, and you could had a CW decoder built in, and you could also plug a standard IBM keyboard into the back of it and type, and see it would produce CW. And I still have one of these, and it's on loan to a person who just got their license, and they enjoy using it very much. The Omni 7 had a built-in networking capability. So this was a radio designed for remote control. It had an RJ45 jack on the back for connecting it to your network. And here's the Legacy, here's the Eagle 599. Here's a picture of the Delta, the 2. And I have some resources now. Some resources and reference links. There's a Ten-Tech Legacy Net that meets every Sunday, and it's a great place to get on there and listen to them. And the last time I was on was actually at Field Day. I got done with Field Day, and I was just sitting there, and the net came on, so I chatted with them for a while. Here's some other resources, and again, to get to all these resources, you're going to want to use the link which I put in the chat, and I'll put it in there again. This is the link for the slideshow, tiny.cc/OOA. There's the WKC's Virtual Ten-Tech Museum, so you can get a chance to look at it. And you want to guess what's in the box? When you click on it, it shows you one of the MR1 kits that he found. So you can go through and see all variety of Ten-Techs with information on them. Another site that's very similar to that is N4NQY's unofficial Ten-Tech pages, where you can go and get information on them. And a number of things. One of the things I have is I have a link to the manuals so that you can download them either as a zip file from this link. It'll get you all of them, or if you want the individual ones, if you go back to this link that I have right here, you click on this link and it'll take you out, and you can go to pick any of these, what they refer to as legacy manuals for the older equipment. I also have some things on my website with Ten-Tech links, some QRP links, and other things that you might find useful. Again, the link is tiny.cc/OOA for this presentation today. We'll come back and answer questions here in a moment. Just my contact information, K8ZT@ARRL.net, and my website of www.K8ZT.com. By the way, this is me in my trainman's uniform. I work on the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad where I volunteer, and this is my latest QSL card, and this is a picture of a steam engine that comes and visits us once every year for about 3 weekends. So if you're in Ohio in May and you'd like to ride behind a steam engine, go to the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad. The other thing I wanted to mention is I have a list of all of my slideshow presentations I've been doing and talks that I've been doing. I've done over 125 talks since the beginning of COVID to local clubs. If you have a local club that you'd like a presentation on, please feel free to go through this list, find something you're interested in, drop me an email, and I'd be happy to do a presentation for your local club. Or if you just rather like to look through the slideshows yourself or watch any of the recorded YouTube's videos, you're welcome to do that. So let's go back, and I will take questions and comments, and I'm going to do a couple things here. I'm going to stop my screen sharing first of all, and I'm going to move my camera around. So I'll go ahead and start taking questions, but I'm going to actually move my camera for some displays here in a few moments. So let's go ahead and do that while I'm moving my camera around.
Anthony, thank you for that presentation and your dedication to put together all that history on Ten-Tech. And that takes a lot of work to do the research, to put it together, to make a nice PowerPoint and everything. And 100-something presentations that you've done in the past 2 years. That's amazing. I know you've done a few, and you'll do some more for us. But Anthony, if you could clarify one thing for me. So
Yes.
I've always heard, you know, in the past, you know, 20 years or so, that just everybody who's a CW operator, you know, venerates Tentec. So what rig really is the one that the CW operators go crazy over, and why in particular?
You know, it's hard to pick out one, but the whole fast pin diode switchover for keying is one of the big things. The fact that there's no relays, the fact you can hear between your, you know, you can hear between your dits and das. I mean, the Argonaut works great, but a lot of people like the Omni series. A lot of people, you know, it just depends what vintage they were using. I've not used all the radios. I've used a number of them. My wife accuses me of having owned them all, but I did not actually own them all. So I can't say that, but maybe some of the people out there might have their favorites that they might want to talk about.
We'll do that. And just one, what is your favorite from physical, the physical face panel? Which one do you like the best?
Well, I have to say that I'm gonna say the 515 because it's, you know, your first love is always your best. But I think I really like the way it's laid out. It's not a very deep radio, so I was able to put in this little case here. I'm going to show in a few moments, and I think that's probably my favorite. And I like the black finish on the 515 better than the white ones because it doesn't leave the marks on the front that the white cases do. So that's probably my favorite is the 515. I'd have to say.
You know, something I with the Tentec, I like the white or the off-white colors, but I like the way that the Century looks. There's something about it that
Well,
that grabs me about that.
I like the Century 22's cream color too. That's very nice. It's sort of like the Argosy, but it's not the same as the Argosy. It's, yeah, we're not gonna get that sit right. Okay.
And then one other thing, Anthony, why did they go out of business?
Well, they've actually been sold a couple times. They, I don't know exactly. I just know rumors, and you know, from going to Dayton and talking to people over the years. But and other people might have more information on this. But a lot of their business was dependent on other services. They made a big portion of the business was the cases that they produced, and they produced these cases for a number of different industries and for the military. So their case manufacturing was a big portion of their money making thing, and the amateur radio in some ways was not the main money maker for the company. I don't know what was the ultimate downfall of the company, but I know it was sold at least 3 times. Currently, I think the people that own the rights are the same people that are the amplifier company in Southwest Ohio, but I don't know that for sure right now. One of the companies along the way, and I won't name which one, basically was a sort of a hedge fund company that sold everything off and, you know, liquidated as much as they could.
Originally,
Yeah,
it was sold,
that was the curse of the 1980s. Really, a lot of big companies got chopped up and sold for its pieces.
Yes.
And then, not to mention, the Japanese competition became incredibly strong, and look where it is today. Maybe outside of Elecraft and one other, we don't really have any American companies making these radios anymore.
there was
So much for my questions. Let's open it up to the floor. Anybody like to ask Anthony something? Just fire away.
Howard, the fellow that invented the Seagate hard drive, he became a ham. He wanted to own an American company. He bought it originally from Jack Bridgefield. Jack sold the property to Walmart for all that acreage. They wanted to build a super Walmart on that property. And so at the end, the fellow that has it now rented a building in back of that property on that back road that's in the back of Tentec. There's like a back road there. Anyway, then 3 guys that owned Alpha at the time bought it from the guy that had Seagate. And let me think, there was also, and by that time, things are changing real fast. And of course, all the production and everything, all those people, most of the people were gone. Scott had already left. He's got into Vibroplex, Scott Robbins, and then he took Stan with him, who was one of the marketing guys. And it just fell apart, unfortunately. So,
And you know, another big factor too is they also lost their programmer, and You
Yeah.
don't think about that as much, but in modern radio, that was very important.
Yeah.
The person that was doing all the programming, and that's the person I would talk to in Dayton over the last couple of years. The person who was
Yeah.
doing a lot of the programming and putting together firmware for the newer radios.
They also had a lot of government contracts, which I believe they still kept a couple, because that RX 340 receiver, that real expensive receiver, is built in the 90s, is still being made. They put knobs on it because the government was using them for remote receivers throughout the world. But the Coast Guard wanted a knob on the front. So they made a knob radio, the RX 340, which is still being produced today at about $6,000. So
Interesting stuff, Jeff. So back in the 80s, you either got carved up by a hedge fund, or you got bought up by Walmart or Costco,
yeah,
or you got killed by the Japanese. So I mean, what a competitive business to be in, unbelievable.
very tough.
Okay, any other comments or questions for Anthony?
I'm going to do a couple of quick show and tells here first, Howard. If you owned an early Ten-Tech, this is one of the accessories you need. This is an RCA jack to PL259 connector adapter, because they used RCA jacks on the back of the Argonauts, the PM series, for a variety of connections, including the antenna. Up on top here is a box. It has a power mite in it. This is an original box from Ten-Tech with a power mite in it. Over here, let me see if I can move this over. This is one of the RX series receivers, and the Signalizer powered speaker and filter. And I'm going to go ahead and reconnect this so we can take some questions while I'm trying to mount this camera again here. And then I'll do a show and tell on the Argonaut itself.
I think another thing about Ten-Tech, I mean, they were such a great company back in the day as far as helping hams and service. I know people would call the service department and talk directly to the techs, and the techs would spend, an hour on the phone with somebody helping them debug a problem or whatever. And of course, that all cost money. So there was such good business for the customers, but in the end, I think it led to their demise, because it's it costs time for a tech to sit there on the phone.
You bring up a great point, Jeff. Greg, rather. They had the best customer service, I think, of anybody.
Yeah, very excellent. Larry Worth and those guys really did a good job down there.
I mean, if you compare that to today, I remember I used to call up Drake in the 1960s, and they would just say pack it up and ship it to them, and they'd fix it and send it back to you, and most of the time no charge. Today, I remember a couple of years ago, we called up Yesa when we were asking about how to get their radio on FT8, and they didn't even know what we were talking about, and that was the top guy there. There was nobody else. You wait like 2 hours to get him on the phone, and he didn't know.
Huh?
I'm not kidding you about this. It's unbelievable. Anything else for Anthony? I'm sure you guys must have a lot of things to ask.
Hey, Anthony.
George, I think you were first. Go ahead, George, LSB.
Anthony, just for a second or two, you might cover that Signalizer. I think you may have the S30 version there. I had one with my PM3 some years ago, and that is, even by today's standards, that is quite a nice little box.
Well, I have the S20 version.
Okay, so that doesn't have the switchable filter.
It has the AFC only on it. I have another one that's an S30. This is my S20, but I have one of each.
Okay, but the S30 has a switchable filter,
Yes.
and it even though when I connected the PM3 to my full-size 40-meter vertical, the radio would levitate, the filter actually did quite a good job on CW.
Yes. As the case with any direct conversion receiver like the Power Mite, they were very susceptible to RF interference from big broadcast stations, and they were also very susceptible to any kind of physical movement. So if you tap on the table and you had those headphones on, it would blow your ears out. So yeah, it was very much a multi-receiving experience when you would use the direct conversion receiver. I had it on a little earlier when I was listening to the RX. That's an RX10, by the way. That's not a power mic. That's the receive only one. I had the RX10 on a little earlier. When I got on 20 meters, it was completely covered by a broadcast station that I'm not sure how it was even getting in, but it was breaking in and just covering it up.
Great presentation, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, who's up next for Anthony?
I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Anthony, thank you for the presentation. I had a Paragon 2 fully optioned Centurion Linear Model 238 tuner in '95, which that was probably one of the best CW rigs I ever had. But watching your presentation, I had an Omni 7 and the software in that was a real big problem. I think I had it back to the factory at least 2 or 3 times. And I also had an Orion, and I don't think you mentioned the Orion, unless I missed it. So what did you think of that? I didn't like it, and I sold it right away.
I never had any experience with Orions, but on the Paragon, on the Omni 7, the software was a big issue, the firmware, and that was what I said. They lost the person that was the programmer near the end, and that was really the death knell of that radio, because it was funny. They had adopted. There was very similar firmware for both the Jupiter and the Omni 7 because they came out around the same time. And they had actually put more features in the firmware for the Jupiter than they did for the Omni 7, which was the more expensive, newer radio. And I kept getting promises they were working on it, and that's when the programmer left. So that was the end of that process. And I do have an Omni 7 sitting on the desk here, and it is a fine receiver. The software was somewhat a problem. If you get around that, it's a very good receiver, very good radio. It was one of the last radios that I owned where you had to put in multiple filters. So again, the expenses of putting in multiple filters, something that we've forgotten about with the newer radios, that we don't have to do that with. Newcomers, when I talk about buying radios, I talk about the fact that when you're buying some of the older radios, the cost of the filters for the radio might exceed the cost of the radio when you start adding them up. And that isn't automatic. So people that have bought a radio in the last 2 or 3 years and don't know what radios like before, don't realize the filtering situation, how much has changed, how much more the newer radios have the filtering built into them. And while I'm mentioning that, let me just talk real quick about this little box up here. I'm going to go ahead and turn this on, and I'll do a little quick demonstration here of some of the things on the Argonaut. So we're on 40 meters right now. And we go down to the CW portion of the band. So this add-on filter here is actually inserted in the IF chain of the radio. So you plug it in the back and it really makes a huge difference. It also has a notch. And the first version of that was actually came out with the 509. So when I added that, it really improved this radio tremendously. And there's a jack on the back where you plug it in and it interrupts the IF. So if you ever pick up one of these, a 509 or a 515, and they don't have any audio coming out of them, it's probably because that jack is missing from the back of the radio. You need to cover that connection between those two things. Has to be looped in if you're not using the filter.
I guess I have a comment, if I may.
Yes.
I have 4 Orions. One is presently being used as a parts radio because parts are not available anymore. But I went from a Sherwood modified Drake C line, which is still my best love, to the Orion. And I have to tell you that the Orion is a dream to reuse with all of the filters. When Sherwood came out with their first IF filter, it was the Omni, Tentec, in the Orion rather, that actually put it into a commercially available radio. And they're the ones who called it the roofing filter. So the Omni, the Orions with the roofing filter are very, very effective. I can go from a TR7 in a very crowded condition and go to either the R4C with the Sherwood filters in it or the Orion. And when I do that, I've just stepped off from a rowboat to a luxury liner. It's really, really a wonderful radio.
You don't like a rowboat, huh?
What's that?
You don't like a rowboat, huh?
Well, Jeff, at this stage of the game, I don't do much rowing.
Well, you know, a QRP rowboat is a kayak, and I'm more of a kayak person. I guess I have a basic QRP personality because I love to fly fish when I did fishing before. And instead of having a canoe, I've always had a kayak, and I've always had economy cars. So I guess I'm a QRP minimalist by heart.
Anthony, there was something in the chat. John is asking, is there a specific buy and sell site someplace for Tentec?
I don't know off the top of my head. I know there used to be a very, very active email list. I don't know what the status of that is any longer. I've not kept up with that. During the 90s, I was very active. I wrote some articles for them for the mailing list, and I was involved with that. I don't know the answer to that, but the net, I would check into that net is the first thing I would do because there's some very knowledgeable people on Sunday afternoons on that Tentec Legacy net.
Isn't that 14,325?
I think it is. Let me get I'll go back to the thing on
I
my
think it's
slideshow.
14,325, and I think there's one on 40 also, but I can't think of the frequency. It's down around 7210, somewhere around there, I think.
Yeah, they meet. They meet on Saturdays on 80 meters.
Oh, 80 meters. 80 meters.
Sundays on 40 and on 40-meter phone on Sundays. And they said they want to start a 15-meter single sideband net in the future, but they don't have someone doing it yet. But the one I've listened to is the 40-meter single sideband net at 1:30 Eastern on 7.195.
Okay, any other comments or questions for Anthony?
Yes, I have one.
All right, let's go one at a time. Jimmy, let's go.
Again, thank you so much for the presentation, Anthony. It's very, very good. Really enjoyed it. My question relates to your QRP work. Two questions. What antenna did you use with your radios, and what was the predominant key?
Well, over the years, I've had different antennas. Right now, my current setup is I have a 50-foot tower with a 3-element beam on it for 30 through 6. And on 40, I use a 43-foot vertical. On 160, I'm sorry, 160 and 80, I use a sloper coming off the tower, a 60-foot sloper on 160 and another sloper on 80. Is my current antennas. I also operate portable a lot, so I use a variety of end feds and other antennas. So there's not one antenna I've used. As far as keys, I love to contest, so most of my contest keying is actually done with a keyboard because I'm sending from the keyboard while I'm contesting. So that's a lot of my CW operation is done that way. In the field, I have a couple different keyers I use. Sometimes old straight keys. Old straight keys always sitting on the desk here, so I can reach up and do a quick dit for people. So, excuse me. But a variety of things over the years that I've used. I have a whole presentation on QRP in the list there that if you're interested in QRP and a lot of information on that. I also have a presentation on portable operations. I like to take my KX2 out and operate portable a lot. That's probably my go-to portable radio now for both CW and phone. I use that quite a bit. But I've used a variety of antennas over the years. As I said, I passed my 40-year mark last year, and things are always changing. My wife says there's a constant influx of things coming in and going out, so that she never knows what's really here.
Okay, Anthony, there's something in the chat from Peter. Hold on a second, Walter. Any idea how many Argonauts were produced?
I can tell you how many 515s were produced. There was just under 800 515s produced. So that's why they're so rare, and that's why they hold their value. I've owned 3 of them over the years. My original, I've had 2 other ones that have came in and went back out again. I don't know what the numbers were like for the 505 and the 515. The 509 was the one that was by far and away the most produced of the 3. We're talking thousands on that, but as I said earlier, only around a little under 800 515s being produced. 505s, I'm guessing probably in the 2,000 range, but I don't know. But the bulk of the Argonauts were the 509s by far and away. And I've owned about 30 509s over the years that have came home, visited my house. My children, from the time they were toddlers at a Hamfest, could pick out a Ten-Tech case and let me know that there was one around the corner to go buy. So a number of PM series have also came home, and a number of 505s. I think I've owned about a half a dozen 505s, but the 509s are by far the most common.
Okay, Walter, you had a question?
Yes, Anthony, I'm looking at your carpentry and those shelves. I'm wondering what's supporting the rear of those shelves. It looks like 1/4-inch plywood routed into the 3/4-inch stock.
That is correct. That is correct. This is the type of case that when I first got my license, when I first got my radio, I lived in an apartment. I had no place to set up a shack. So I basically built this with my father. And the idea is I routed these in. It's just a pine wood. And then on the back, it's open so you can get to the back of it. In between each of the items, and the items have changed over the years. Originally, this had an old MFJ tuner in it and some other things. This is the latest iteration of it. Has a handle on the top. I can pick up the handle. Pick up the thing, and it's movable. So I would set this down to operate on the desk. When I was done, I'd put it back in the closet, so it would move around. So this was my first first to go kit, I guess you would call it. On the back of it, it's all open. I can't really swing it around too. Let me see if I can swing it around here without knocking everything loose.
You don't have to do that.
No, it's okay. So you can see around the back of it here a little bit.
I'm surprised those shelves are not sagging.
I'm sorry?
I'm surprised the shelves are not sagging at all. That's why
Nope.
Well, the Ten-Tech radios are pretty light.
Yeah, the radio is pretty light. And my father always insisted on overbuilding everything, so it's got glue holding everything together.
No, Anthony, if people make it down to Sevierville for the Hamfest, there's a pretty good selection of Ten-Tech gears you can imagine, because it was widely popular in the area.
You know, and I've never got a chance to go there for the Hamfest. I've always wanted to go, but I've never gotten a chance. So
it was great. They used to have a real nice, from Friday, Saturday. It was great. And no computers were allowed at the time, back in the day.
I'm not speaking of the Ten-Tech Hamfest. Of course, those are long gone, but the Sevierville Radio Club has still a Saturday Hamfest. I mean, it's not knockdown, drag out, but as you can imagine, there's a lot of people in the area that bring that Ten-Tech gear in to sell it for those that are looking.
By the way, for guys that operate AM, the Paragon was a general coverage receiver with AM, and then they wanted to get the government contract. Lockheed, they wanted a Lockheed contract with the Paragon 2, so they put AM transmit, and that was required. Plus, obviously, upper sideband. But in order to get the contract for Lockheed, they put AM transmit on the Paragon. And after that, all their radios had great AM for transmit.
I have a question here from Rick NN2K about PTOs. Yes, one of the things that was notorious is the grease that they use in the PTOs on the 505s, 509s, and the 515s would harden up, and your PTO would start moving. And so you tear the thing apart. Now, you could do one of two things. You could do a full rebuild where you would replace the the bearings and different portions of it, or simply clean it out and refurbish the grease. I found out that in about 90% of the time, there was no need to rebuild the PTO. It was just a matter of cleaning out and re-greasing it. There are also a couple tricks you can use for short-term fixes to that grease problem. I found that you can turn the radio over without tearing everything apart, which is required to do the PTO change. You can sometimes use a hair dryer and heat it up enough to get it moving again. And once you get it moving, the freeze up portion with the problem with the grease is much more pronounced if you don't use the radio on a day-to-day basis. If you're using the radio every day, you don't tend to get that type of trouble. But if you heat it up with a hair dryer, sometimes you can get it loose enough to get it to work and not have to do a rebuild. Also, very, very careful application of some Tricor lubricant into a PTO will sometimes free it up enough to be able to do it. But most of the time, it doesn't actually require a full rebuild, just simply a cleaning out and re-greasing. The other thing that's very common too would be you'd have to change the dowel cord, because there's a dowel cord that runs this whole thing across. And one of the suggestions is that you always move the dowel to the furthest to the left, so there's no strain on the elastic cord when you're not using the radio, and that prevents it from stretching out. If you ever see the red indicator leaning from one side or the other, that means that there's slack in the cord, in the dowel string, and the elastic is not working very well anymore. You used to be able to send off to Tentec, and they would send you out a little kit with the new dowel cord and the elastic and everything in it. I strung many a dowel cord, and the last time I did one, there was no Tentec supplies to get, so I went to my local fabric store and got some equivalent elastic cord and some heavy duty string, and was able to redo it that way with a little bit of practice. But that was a very common thing. And actually in the front of the manual, one of the first pages in the manual shows you how to take the front dowel off by building a little piece of metal tool that you slide behind to release the spring lock on that. So yes, I've done that before numerous times, and that's why a lot of them would follow me home and get refurbished and then go back out again for resale.
If I could add one comment to what you just said.
Yes.
If you do decide to rebuild a PTO, take lots of pictures of it as you go.
Yes.
When you start, and every time you remove something, take a picture of it, because
also
you will need it.
Also work inside of a container so that the ball bearings don't go running across the road. I suggest having a deep dish baking pan to work inside of, so that when you do it, I did that not with a Tentec Argonaut, but with a Yaesu antenna, one of those mobile antennas that has all the little things that opened up, and I never got it back together again because the bearings flew all around the garage.
Like taking a rotor apart.
Yes. Other questions?
I had a question.
Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned that the Power Mite was a discrete modular design. Was this something Tentec always tried to incorporate into their designs, or was it, did they just return to it in its ultimate expression with the Scout?
Well, it wasn't so much, when I talk about modules, I'm talking about the modules for each of the circuits, and a lot of it was based on the fact that they originally had that MR1 kit, so they were pretty much following in the same footsteps of using that up. Some of the Power Mites, when you open them up, as I said, varied considerably, and some of them are all on one board. They weren't on separate boards. So there were a variety of insides for them. Now, when you talk about the Scout had modules that plugged in for each of the bands, and that was a unique radio in that respect that they built. And they also built two versions of the Scout, a high power version and a low power version. And as I said, I have one of them here in the shack. It wouldn't be easy for me to grab it, unfortunately. But what's happened is because of the demand for some of the modules, if you buy 2 or 3 of the modules, they're more expensive than the radio. But it was a very interesting radio, and it was very unique the way they designed it.
Hey, Anthony?
Yes.
You mentioned the Jones filter a while ago. I had a Scout quite some time ago with all of the modules, as a matter of fact. And that Jones filter was absolutely a fabulous way to go.
Oh,
I
yes.
just love that thing.
Well,
Why did other manufacturers not glom onto that?
Well, from my experience, a lot of hams didn't know how to use it, and they were very confused by it. And what they would end up doing is setting the notch and the width such that they would eliminate all signals. So it was sort of operator error type of thing, and once you got so messed up, it was so hard to hard to get it adjusted back again if you weren't paying attention to what you were doing. So I think it was. I'm going to chalk it up to people not knowing how to use something new and not learning how to use it right, because it was great.
I also remember hearing about some patent issues with that Jones filter and Tentec or something. So I don't know what the whole story was there, but I don't know if that flows into this at all.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that, but you know what's really happened is that type of process is really what's predominant now. I mean, that Argonaut 2 with that filtering, the ability to narrow the filter with just the turn of a dial instead of having to change filters, was a really revolutionary thing. And another outgrowth of me starting this way with Tentec is I'm never really used tube equipment. So I'm fairly ignorant on tubes. I've been a solid state person all my life. Not only are my boat anchors light, but they're also usually solid state. Next question.
I think it was a very good presentation. Thank you, Anthony. Very
Thanks.
good.
After we're all done here, I'm going to crank it up, and I'm going to make contacts on 40 meters here. So if you'd like to make a contact with an Argonaut, I'll be on 40 meters after we're done here.
Okay.
Actually, let me just bring this up real quick here. I had this from this morning. Let me just go back to screen share. So while I was getting things set up this morning, let me adjust the volume, or this is not going to work right. So this is NJ4SU's live feed here.
Thanks, Anthony. Take care. Kilo 8 Zulu Tango generator in the cabin. All right, that's permissible. Mike 73 1950. Take care. I'll break with W1 Mike Alpha Echo. He's got an 897. He turned it down though because he's on a generator. That's my bad. I just try to filter out the guys that turn 100-watt radios down. Can't stand that. All right, Lima Zulu Tango.
Kilo 8 Zulu Tango. Kilo 8 Zulu Tango.
Yeah, go ahead, Tony. What are you running?
Tentec Argonaut 515, 2 watts to a vertical.
2 watts to a vertical. Very nicely done. Anybody else hearing Anthony?
57 York, PA.
5 in Southern Mass, K1, Taylor 20.
56 in West Virginia, KC2.
S5 in Connecticut.
Are you getting good reports, Anthony? What's the antenna?
It's a 43-foot vertical with an antenna tuner.
Yeah, nicely done. Very good. Thanks, Anthony. Take care. Kilo 8 Zulu Tango. Last checked you went back in June 16th. Take care.
So that was this morning when I was getting set up, operating on 40 meters with the Argonaut.
That was very cool, Anthony. You know, I think we could run longer than this, but it is getting late, and maybe we'll just take one more question, and then we could always have Anthony come back to talk about this subject if there's enough interest. Anybody want to take one last question for Anthony? Okay, I guess that's it. Let's all unmute and give Anthony a wonderful round of applause.
Good job, Anthony. Thank you.
That was a good one, Anthony. I really enjoyed that, and thank you very much. And you had your grand finale actually showing us what your radio sounded like on the air. That was very cool. So thank you everybody for the great turnout today. I appreciate you coming out in mass. We got an interesting presentation next week. We have a gentleman that's going to talk about radios that were around in the days of the Waltons, if you remember that TV show. And they had one in particular that they showed on that show, and he's got the same model, and he's going to talk all about that particular era. That's going to be very interesting. That's coming next Saturday. So enjoy the rest of the weekend, 73s, and see you down the log, okay?
And Howard, I will be on